Hi everyone, in the last video we looked at how to set up a V-Ray rendering from scratch in Rhino. The results you can see here in the frame buffer. We have now some nice shading on our objects. We have shadows, we have a sky in the background, and as I mentioned in the last video, we want to look at how we can further modify this sky to change our rendering and to change the character of our rendering and to produce even more complex effects than we're seeing in the frame buffer now. You'll recall that the reference for these funny egg shapes is this GIF Coon's sculpture Balloon Dog. And what we have going on in this sculpture is much more complex materiality than we have in our scene currently. We also have, with that materiality, a pulling or mapping of the environment onto the object, and that's something that we would like to achieve in V-Ray. To show you how to do that, there are going to be a couple of steps, and the goal ultimately will be to map multiple environments onto the same object. But if we change the sky, it might change the overall character of our scene. However, it's not going to impact the objects much currently because we have a very flat material applied to the objects currently. This is just a default Rhino material. We actually haven't made a V-Ray material yet, and that's what we're going to cover in this video. In order to set up a material in V-Ray, I need to go back up to the V-Ray menu and select Material Editor. Let me pull it up. And there are currently no materials in our scene. The TAs have provided some materials on the transfer drive for you. And if I right-click on Scene Materials, you can see that there's an option to load a material. This is how you would get a material from an external source into the scene. But I'm going to create a material from scratch. So I'm going to select the option above Load Material. And you will see that there are a number of material options here. I'm interested in the simplest option for now, and that is a V-Ray standard material. I'm going to select standard, and a new default material pops into the list under scene materials. I'm going to rename this. Well, let's just keep it default material for now. Actually, I will rename it default material 01, and I'm renaming it simply because if I make another material with this name, or another material from scratch, it's also going to have the name default material. In order to keep them straight, I'm going to want to give them new names on the fly. Maybe I'll even rename this layer Diffuse 01, just so there are no problems down the road. So now I have default material 01, and you'll see under this material there's a layer. And when we add more complex effects like reflection, we'll add additional layers to the material. But to make a very, very simple material, you just need a diffuse layer. And you can also do texture mapping and transparency mapping with diffuse materials or just with a diffuse layer. And so you can get quite sophisticated effects with the diffuse layer. I'm not going to go into all of the things that you can do with materials in this tutorial. This is just to get you up and running with basic V-Ray materials, a diffuse material, and then a simple reflective material. Our first material here is going to be the diffuse material, and so default material 1 now exists in our scene, and we're going to apply it to the objects that we have. I'm going to, the color, we can we can adjust by clicking on the color the color swatch. And if we wanted to map a texture to this shader, we could click the little M next to the color swatch, and this is where we could start finding bitmaps and applying them to the texture for texture mapping. That's out of the scope of this tutorial. We just want to cover a diffuse material and a reflective material. So having made the diffuse material, I'm going to close the material editor and look at how I can apply that material to our scene objects. You can, just like with Rhino materials, apply V-Ray materials to items in your scene on a per object basis, but more often than not it's going to be better to group objects by into layers based on materials when you're rendering. So I'm simply going to type purge and get rid of all of the default layers that came in with the new Rhino file, and now I'm going to make a new layer, and I'll call it basic material, and I'll slide the properties window open a little bit so we can see more of the options here. And you'll see that I have a number of things in the Layers tab. The name of the layer, whether it's on, whether it's locked, the color of the layer, and then after color there's a material swatch. And I want to, first of all, I'm going to put all of my objects into the basic material layer by selecting them, then right-clicking the name of the layer and selecting Change Object Layer. And now these objects are in the basic material layer. Next, I'm going to assign the V-Ray material to the layer. And I do that by selecting the little circle swatch under the materials column. I select that, and the layer material panel pops up. All of the settings you see here relate to Rhino materials, but we want to use a V-Ray material. Therefore, I'm going to ignore all of this and instead check the little box at the top, which says Assign Material by Plugin, V-Ray for Rhino. And now I'm going to browse, select Browse, and a little option window pops up which says Choose, and then it says Materials, and there's a drop down. And I'm going to select Default Material 1, which is the material that I just made, and hit OK. And then hit OK at the bottom. And now you can see our objects are a little darker. They have the gray material. And if I render this scene, you can see that in fact the objects have changed color. And they're quite dark. If I want to edit the material, I can, let's see, if I double click on the material swatch in the Layers panel, the Layer Material Manager pops up, and I can simply from this window select Edit, and it's going to pop back to that material. So this is where I could very quickly give the material a color to experiment. Close out. If I hit Preview, you can see a preview of the color. You can see that in the Rhino view, oh, I didn't commit that change. I'm going to go back, Preview. This looks fine. Click out, hit OK. And now we can also see the yellow color in the Rhino viewport. You may not see that color depending on how you have the shaded preview set. If it's not set to show the rendering material, you may not see the color of the objects. So now I have a nice, let's say, cheerful yellow set of eggs balancing into a gateway, and I can proceed with now making a reflective material. So this gets us somewhat close to the materiality of the balloon dog, but we have the color, but we don't have the reflectivity. So now we need to add that to our material. In order to do that, I'm going to make a second material so that we can have several materials, or at least two materials in our scene. And to make a new material, I'm going to go back to the material editor. I will, maybe I'll just duplicate this material and see how that works. And now I have default material 2, and I'm going to rename this to rename material. I'm going to rename this reflective material. Call this reflective material 1. Hit OK. And you can see that the name of the diffuse layer in each material is the same. Now, I don't know if that's going to cause problems or not, but I'm just going to go ahead and rename this to diffuse 2. That may be an unnecessary step because this diffuse layer is embedded in the material, and it may not link across these materials. But just to be safe, I'm going to give it a new name. And now I'm going to add the reflectivity to this material by right-clicking on the name of the material. I'm going to select the Create Layer option and select Reflection. And there are a number of different layers here. Diffuse, obviously, we could make another diffuse layer, but that wouldn't really accomplish anything. We could, if we wanted the material to emit light, we could choose emissive. If we want to add refraction to the object, then we could add a refraction layer. But for now, we're just going to add a reflection layer. And so now we get reflection. And there are going to be some basic settings by default in the reflection layer. If we hit preview, we're just now previewing the reflection. And if we select diffuse, we're just previewing the diffuse layer. I need to select the overall material name and hit preview to actually see both of those things combined. And now you see that we have reflectivity added to the object, and in addition to the diffuse color, so they're combined. And so the principle of layering is very straightforward. It's just a matter of becoming aware of how these things work, or the need to actually add these secondary material effects as layers in your scene or to your material. So now I'm going to close out. So now I have reflective material 1. Maybe for my diffuse material, let's just see the difference now. I'll leave the diffuse material yellow, but I'm going to make a new layer, and I will call it reflective 1. And importantly, before I move any objects into this layer, I want to make sure that I've actually assigned the new material to this layer. So I come to the material swatch, and up here again, click Assign Material by Plugin, browse, choose the reflective material, hit OK, OK. Now I have that material assigned to this layer, and I just need to put a couple of objects into this layer. So I'm going to simply select a couple of objects from the gateway, and then in the Layers Manager, select Change Object Layer. And so now you can see that the highlight from the sun is, which is acting in part as a direct light in our scene, shows up already in the shaded preview. Now I'm going to render this. And it's subtle, but we can really start to see reflections happening on these objects. Here we can see the reflection of the shadow on the ground. We get much more of the blue of the sky reflecting in this object, and it's difficult to see. But if I zoom in on this highlight and render again, should pop in just at the very end. We're getting this little spot, which is actually the direct light. So this is the sunlight in the scene popping in onto our rendering. And when you have more complex materials, sometimes you don't actually want to see these little highlights coming from the light source. They can start to look like errors on your rendered objects. So I'm going to quickly show you how to turn that off. I'm zoomed in on the object, so it's going to be very difficult for me to select the sun without zooming out and select it graphically, that is, in the viewport. But since I only have one light in the scene, I'm just going to type SEL for select, and then LIGHT for light. And so cell light is the command which will actually select lights in your scene, just like SEL, CRV will select all of the curves in your scene. Now I have the sunlight selected. You can see it was actually behind this object. And I'm going to go to the Properties tab, and under Sun, there's a checkbox for invisible. So if I check invisible, it's not going to turn the sun off, but it will mean that the sun will be invisible in reflections. Pulling the frame buffer, again, it's really hard to see. If I zoom in here, I see this little white pixelated moment in the rendering, and that's the sun. So by turning the checkbox on the sun to invisible, I should be able to get rid of this. And if I want to check that without re-rendering the entire rendering, I can actually use this little region render command here. I can set this up in the frame buffer. I select region render, and then I can draw boxes. And this is a fast way to just do a spot check in your scene when you've tweaked something like a material setting without having to re-render everything. So now I have, and I can just toggle that on and off, and it remembers the area that I selected. So we're just going to check and see if I've actually gotten rid of that little sun artifact by hitting render. And now you can see it does in fact go away. And so I'm going to unclick this, and I'm going to go back to my original view. I was looking at all of the objects. There we go. Render this again. So now you see that we have quite a bit of depth in our image just with the simple addition of a reflective layer in the second diffuse material. I'm going to go ahead and close this and select all of these objects. I'm going to leave the ground as a diffuse material. I don't want that reflecting, but I'm going to put all of these objects into the reflection layer, change object layer, and then I'm going to go back and edit the original diffuse material so that it's no longer yellow. I'm selecting edit. Under diffuse 1, and the preview is wrong. I'm just going to select the color, and I'll take this back to a light gray material for now. and then I'm going to close out of here, hit OK, and I'm going to put this change object layer. Somehow it didn't actually take. So let me diffuse material preview. Should be fine. Okay, now I see maybe I just needed to update the preview for it to show correctly in the viewport. Now we can see that we do see a gray material here. Hit OK. And render. And now I have a gray ground, which is a little washed out in this, so I'm going to go back and simply edit the material to be a slightly darker color, drop it down, hit OK, 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 and render again. Now I get, I think, a nicer contrast between the ground and the objects. Just to reinforce this, I'm going to make one more material, reflective material, and I will go back to the material editor, and rather than doing it from scratch, actually I will do it from scratch. I'll just make a new material, standard material. I'm going to call it, let's see, and now that I have 3 materials in the scene, I probably want to be more descriptive with my name. So I'm going to call this reflective black, and I'll actually go to reflective material 1, and I'm going to change this name to reflective _ yellow. Okay. And in reflective black, I'm going to go to the diffuse color and make it a very dark gray, nearly black. Now I'm going to right-click on the layer name and create a reflection layer, and I'm just going to accept the defaults for now. And if I render the whole thing, now you can see I have a glossy black reflective material, and I'm going to make a new layer, call it reflective black. And of course I need to link the material, so up here, assign material by plugin, browse, select reflective black, OK, OK, and now if I select a few of these objects and put them in the reflective black layer, you can see how they pop into the rendering. And so the lighting is not exceptionally dramatic here. Maybe if I turn around to the other side, it's going to be a little bit brighter. Let's see what we're getting over here. Still a little flat. But you can see, like the Jeff Koons sculpture that we looked at before. Oh, I lost it. So, Koons balloon flower. We looked at this one earlier in the last tutorial. And if we zoom in, there was the image that was really this one. So I pointed out in the last tutorial that what is great about this object is that the highly reflective polished steel not only brings the environment into the object, but also we get parts reflecting parts. So we get this part reflecting that part, and then in the reflection of that part on this object, we also get the reflection of this object again, so it's like turning a mirror in on itself. And so we get an incredible amount of depth at these moments. And we can see here in this image starting to get these multiple reflections happening in our object. And there's actually a way to control how many times this reflection happens. There has to be limits to how many times these sorts of mirrored reflections can happen, because if the computer tried to calculate them to infinity, it would eventually crash. So there has to be a cutoff. I might cover that cutoff in a future tutorial, but for now I think we have covered the basics of setting up diffuse and reflective materials, and you can see that we're getting some sky mapping onto our objects, which gives it quite a lot of depth. And now the environment starts to matter much more, that we are getting reflections on our objects, and that sets us up to do the next tutorial, in which I discuss the ways in which we can manipulate the environment which gets reflected onto the objects and seen in the background, and that will include both the V-Ray sky, default V-Ray sky, and also bringing in HDRI textures as maps, which can also enhance your images and give you more control over what these objects are actually reflecting. So that's what we'll cover in the next tutorial.